started this. We incorporated last July, and I had never anticipated really doing this. This is all kind of dreamy, before all of this. But he called me and he said to me, "I want to put on some kind of conference in Mobile." And I said, "Where do you live?" This is Atlanta. I said, "That's all great." So anyway, long story short, we talked about this and we decided in order to do that conference, we had to be somebody. So it's really thanks to this man for starting this event, putting the wheels in motion and saying, "I want to do something." And I have to give all this credit to my cousin, and I don't know how we're related, but we're related somehow. We're going to figure it out. It's somewhere through the Wileys, we don't know. But he's absolutely brilliant. Don't let him be honest. He's got a couple of books under his belt. He was in the Department of African American Studies at Perimeter College, associated with Georgia State.
Georgia State University.
Yeah, okay, Georgia State University. So Perimeter's actually been something to that?
Yes.
So he's kind of the top dog over here.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to stand over here because so I can control my. Oh, I got not stand. That's what I did the first time. I'll put something in front of it. To figure out.
Your spine is down.
That's it. Yeah. Now it does. It's one thing to come up with an idea to start something, but Tracy actually put things together. So so I'm really. I just put the plug in her ear and she ran with it. So I'm really proud with what she has done. So. Let's just give her a hand. And I think I'm going to get this to work again. Okay. All of this started from the Facebook group Mobile Creole Connections. And that's where today is the first time I met Tracy face to face. It's also the first time I met Chris, and everybody's here. And so we kind of hit it off really easily. It went through Facebook. It was, I like to say it was love at first like. And so here we are. And then it turns out she's related to me. That's awesome. Anyway, what I want to talk to you today is about my journey to connecting to my Mobile Creole roots that I had no idea I had until just a few years ago. Is there anyone else here who's newly discovered the Creole connection? Okay, so you can probably relate to what I have to share with you. I'm going to share with you my connection and what I discovered over the last few years. And so I titled it 1,111 miles in 111 years. 1,111 miles from here to Philadelphia. give or take 2 miles. And that's where I'm from. And that's where my family who migrated, well, the portion that comes from Mobile migrated from there up onto Pennsylvania. And it's been 111 years since my last Creole ancestor. Actually, it's more like since my last Creole ancestor separated from the Creole community, so to speak. And I'm going to explain what I mean by that. So my story in this presentation, as does many of our stories, illustrates a few things. Not only the cultural richness of Creole culture that emerges from all of these various different sources. But it also says something about the fluidity, not only of culture, but the fluidity of what it means, what Creole means. And it also looks at not only the wonderful culture, but also looks at when we look at our collective story, we also see the story of America with all of its ugliness, including namely the racism, sexism, and classism that's embedded in it. And that's been been manifest in the creation of Creole culture to a large extent in Mobile and Louisiana and South Carolina. So hopefully that come across with what I'm talking about. Also, I'm hoping that for those of you who are researchers who may be new or just beginning, I still consider myself an amateur researcher. I'm trying to grow up to be like Chris Norman over there. But so I'm hoping you will learn from this presentation these three things. There are three things that I think are essential to developing our family history and recovering our history. And I call it the Holy Trinity of effective family research. And it's responsible for me being here, for all that I've gathered here. There are three things that make this Trinity. Document research. All of us are familiar with that and the importance of that. And the next thing is a very new tool that's available to us, DNA analysis. And the final of those three is network. All three of these are very essential tools for us. There's no better way to do it. And because it's one thing to do the research, but when you're doing it on your own, it's a wonderful experience to find a fellow researcher who's researching your same family. And we need to make sure we take advantage of that. And I know I have some researchers, and we know some researchers who kind of somewhat disagree with that, who are kind of keep off to themselves, and that is not really productive for anyone because there's so many riches to uncover. So much of what I found and continue to find is through employing this. And in fact, this gathering today is an example of the use of network and its effectiveness. This is my family from Philadelphia, from Kemp, all of the names there. These folks on the side there, the one up top is my mother. Joan, her maiden name is Joan Wiley. And the rest of the tree, this is all of her tree. My Creole connection comes through her father, Willie Wiley. So this picture is up at the top. But my knowledge began from her mother, my grandmother, Mertice Thompson Wiley. I've been fortunate to have her in my life, all of my life up until a few months ago. She passed on at the age of 96.
Wow.
Yeah, and she was largely responsible for all of what I found out regarding my family history, not just the connection to her side, but also to her husband, who I did not know at all, right? And so my understanding of my Creole connection was non-existent until a few years ago. All that I knew was that Willie Wiley, her husband, my biological grandfather, who had died 5 years before I was born, that his mother was the daughter of what my grandmother referred to as a Spaniard, right? And so it took a while before when I discovered who that Spaniard was, and then discovered his connection to Mobile, and realized that he identified himself as Creole. And all of the records I find, he identified him as Creole. And that was the beginning of it. And I really didn't even know much about the Mobile Creole community. To me, I always associated with Louisiana, like most people. And so I didn't know much about it. But it was by digging up and following the Louisa, my grandmother, I found that out. And then it's funny because she never used the word Creole in association with his family. And then I mentioned she never, when she talked about, my grandmother's also from Mobile. When she talked about Mobile, she didn't talk about Creole, the Creole community. And I asked one day, I said, did you know there's a large Creole community there? She's like, oh, sure, yeah. But never shared that. She didn't really explain all of that to me at the time. But so my connection is through the Gomez's. Any Gomez's in here, please be free. Yes, yes. So Wally's mother was Gertrude Gomez, the daughter of Francisco Gomez, and Francisco Gomez Jr. And there's several Gomez's. I mean, there's several Francisco Gomez's. So let me clarify that for you, because it was very confusing for me, and still confusing for a number of folks. But so these are the main three Franciscos, right? So the first was Francisco Gomez, who was a resident, I think, for most of his life in Escambia, Florida. I haven't uncovered that much about him. And he had children and was married to a woman named Dorothea Bauer. I actually did find a record of his wife, and a record or two documenting him. And his son was Francisco Gomez, who was married to Rosalia, sometimes Rosalind, sometimes Rosalia Stewart. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Stewarts in a second. And now that Francisco had another Francisco who was Francisco Gomez, and he was married to Gertrude Carson. And that is my great grandmother's father, right? And now that's my grandmother Gertrude. Not my grandmother. That's my great grandmother. My great grandmother. No, my great grandmother Gertrude Gomez. And she was born in Gomez. Here's the other thing. We got several Gertrudes too. I got three lines of Gertrudes too. She has a Gertrude who I did know, called her auntie. But this was the Gertrude that my grandmother knew about, but she never met her because she had died. But she had this picture of her. And so that was the only picture and connection we had of her. So now the thing about these three, there's also another Francisco that comes after that, but these are the main Franciscos that folks will come across in their research. And the important to note, the second Francisco Gomez is the first Creole Gomez. He's also the first Francisco Gomez to be a resident of Mobile, and the first to be identified, as far as I can see, as Creole, connected to the Creole community. Francisco Gomez was actually a secretary for the Creole Fire Company, and his line of business was he was a tenor, not a tenor as in a singer, but a tinsmith. And they were a line of tinsmiths that developed after that Francisco Gomez. Now, how do we keep these Franciscos distinguished? I've adopted a system that my cousin used, a cousin that I discovered, who was also a Gomez descendant, and she came up with some nicknames that she uses that make sense that I like. And that is, she calls the senior Francisco, the senior-most, the Don Francisco. Now, he's the one who's not connected to Mobile culture. his child would migrate up to Mobile after, well, not after he died, but probably right around the same time. A little bit, no, he actually migrated. But he's so, and I thought that was cool, Don Francisco. So, and so Francisco Senior would be our first Mobile Francisco, and Francisco Junior would be his son, right? And the son after him would be Francisco. Sometimes I see people number him as 4 because he is the 4th. He's actually the 4th, but I call him the 3rd. But the for those who are researching the Gomez's, it's actually these two, the senior and the junior, that you'll most often come across, right? So so Francisco Senior, the first Mobile Creole Francisco, had several children with Rosaline Stewart, and they are Sylvia Leonore, Florida Alexander Francisco Jr., who is my ancestor, and Romana. Anybody connected to any of those? He also had a second wife, and from her he had 4 boys: George Pensacola, Emmanuel, and Alphonse. So it's funny how you can see the geographical roots in the name, right? They named one daughter Florida, another son Pensacola. Pensacola is also called Oscar. Oh, really? Now, Celia married Hugo Kavanaugh, and that may be a name that might be familiar to some of you. And I actually have a cousin descends from the two of them, who actually lives in Atlanta, and shame on us, we haven't even met yet. And the other daughter, one of the other daughters, Amanda, married Robert Higgins. And my cousin and fellow researcher, Rita Calloway, descends from those two. The other girl of the bunch, Florida, did not have any children. She actually ended up raising those 4 boys that were the second wife's children. She ended up raising them after her father died, as well as a few of her other children. So she was a pretty well remembered, even though she had no children. It was a respected elder in the family. This picture, by the way, Rita Calloway discovered is from the Paul Library collection. And they also have a few other pictures of Gomez's who we can't really identify. These are the only 2 Gomez's that I can readily identify that I have photos of. Her and Amanda Gomez. These were actually the last 2 daughters that Francisco had. Yes. Where did the Higgins come from? I don't know. You would know better than I do, but I can definitely direct you to exactly where the Higgins come from. I'm in touch with Rita, who's done some extensive. So, in fact, I have a picture of her. She has, and I have a picture of her husband. Francisco Gomez Jr. Married Gertrude Carson, and they had That's an animation film. Anyway, I'll put it right here and then go back. Their children were Pedro, Fernando, Gertrude, and that's Gertrude's picture there, St. John, and Francisca, who was Frank. So Gertrude, this Gertrude here. Now she married Joseph Dodd, and the Francisca married Kenneth Perez. Now it was really interesting for me to discover those names because I knew an uncle St. John. I had an uncle St. John who was her son, and we always thought it was strange that someone named St. John, a regular person named St. John, and and then later on, it was like long after he passed, I discovered where that name came from. It came from his uncle. But anyway, Gertrude, as I mentioned the separation from the Creole culture and the Creole community. That separation occurred when Gertrude married Joseph Williams. My grandmother would tell me that Gertrude married when she married Joseph Wiley, she was ostracized from the family because, as my grandmother put it, because Joseph Wiley was black, right? See, I thought that meant because he was African American, but it wasn't. It was because of his complexion, right? So ever since then, she was separated from the family, and in fact, one of her grandchildren just passed year. He only remembers having contact with one of them. That was the youngest one, Aunt Frankie. He said Aunt Frankie came to visit them sometime later, and so he remembers her. But that marked the separation from the Creole community, and so. And I believe that was part of the reason why we never really learned much about the Creole connection as a Creole connection as a result of that. So my grandfather, who was her son, if you look at him, you see the picture, he looks very much, he looks Creole, right? He is what we call a Creole, right? And, but, as far as I know, he never identified himself as Creole, which is interesting because he identified himself as a number of different things. In fact, that was one of the things that he dealt, one of the difficulties he dealt with in his life was of course, he was very brilliant. He was very mechanically gifted, and he was frustrated that he did not get some of the opportunities that would have been afforded to him under different circumstances. And much of his life, from what I hear, he spent a lot of his time identifying himself as something other than he had. He would say that he was from the Honduras or anywhere else, and so I think there was of course, I've had other family members who have done similar things, but I thought it was interesting. He probably would have said he was Creole because people he encountered probably didn't know much about what that meant, right? They would think of it as something other, right? But as far as I know, he did not. My animation process. Now, my other Creole branch. Now, here's the other thing that surprised me too. I didn't know that there were many Spanish Creoles in when I first years ago started looking at drawings. But the Marguerite Collins is I'll just get to the next slide. Show you how I discovered Marguerite Collins. And I figured this out through help from Chris and some of the community on the Mobile Connections page. I posted this marriage bond. I had this for years, and on the bond it had this is the marriage of Francisco Gomez and Rosalie Stewart. And at the top, signing the signatures on it are Francis Gomez, might be Francis Senior, or it might be and Margaret Collins. I could not figure out why was her name on it. But through hashing the discussion out and finding out that someone had records that they couldn't figure it out, they had some of these common names on it, we figured out what this was all about. And it was from here that I discovered that Margaret Collins was the mother of Rosalie Stewart. And which led me to a connection to a whole, and I knew the Collins family was a big name because of Chris. So I was excited. I said, "Now I'm fine with his dissertation." Turns out she's not in there. In fact, we surmised at first that Tracy has Collins ancestry. We surmised that this was the reason why we were there. But we thought she has a Margaret Collins, but it turns out her Margaret Collins is too young. Guy's too early to be young. So, but Marguerite, through some digging, I learned that Marguerite was married to John Alexander Stewart, and these are their children. Some of the names you may recognize. Some of you may recognize the name of Delphine Stewart, married George Washington Point. They eventually settled in New Orleans. And in fact, Marguerite, when she dies in New Orleans. And you probably also saw that I have another name for her, longer name. I usually use this name because I haven't found any confirmation of the longer name. Now, I learned some interesting things about Marguerite. I found a couple of trees that identify the same person as Marie Marguerite Therese de la Besse. My French is terrible. Yeah. So I still put a question mark back because I haven't found the folks who posted this name haven't cited any source material that I could at least confirm whether it's right or not. This is what I do know about Marguerite Colleen Collins. Most of the records are named here as Collins, and in fact, most of the records she does not have her married name. But a few she does. So you got to figure out what that's about. This is what I do know. I do know she was born in Alabama, very likely Mobile, but I can only prove that she was a resident by 1827 by the time of her birth of one of her children. She was a free woman of color and a woman of some means. And I figured that out because she owns a number of slaves. So that was the other shock to me from this. Finding my first slave holding ancestor, and it's not white. so that was kind of a shock to me. She dies in New Orleans on 26 November 1880, and one of my cousins has a newspaper clipping of that. But she should be buried here. She was brought back here. All right, on time. So I think I turned off my phone. All right. Okay. Well, she just walked. I guess I'm okay. She'll go for it. Now, from the 1840 census, I found a listing of some of the enslaved persons that were in her household. And by the way, by 1840, from the best that I could see, her husband had passed. I estimate that her husband probably died in the mid 1830s. But on the 18 court census, it reveals that these are the number of states that has a boy under 10, a male who's between the ages of 10 and 23, broad window there. A man who was between the ages of 24 and 35, two girls under 10, two females who are between the ages of 10 and 23, one woman between the ages of 24 and 35, and another woman between the ages of 36 and 54. So, but by the time we get to the 1850 census and the slave schedule, which gives a little bit more specific information, I found the number has dwindled a little bit. She has one of the enslaved people listed as a woman who's 60 years old, who was identified as black. Of course, in the 1850s, they didn't identify them by color. Well, neither one identified them by name. So very rarely can you find names identified. There were, if you see from this list, there are two people who identified as mulatto. One is a woman 20 years old and a girl 10 years old. Now, what was interesting about this arrangement, though, is that it's very difficult to make sense out. Sometimes you can look at the age arrangement and kind of estimate a family relationships. It's kind of, I can see the 60-year-old woman being anybody's related to anybody, but the 20-year-old woman seems too young to be, almost too young to be anybody's mother. Though it's not, of course, it is possible. Now, I did find a kind of a discrepancy between this and the local the state census. The state census had identified, said that she owned five enslavement. Right? So, one of the things that, so I wondered whether a mistake was made between the girl and boy, maybe the person is listed twice and the gender, kind of mix up there. But then again, I also saw that next to it, there is another person who's identified as a free person of color. And whether one of those people be her, or one of these people would be accountable by their woman. Or I also was thinking that that one probably might be Marguerite herself. Listed there. But anyway, that was the so this is what I found from her. So the at this point, I have a lot to find out. I need to go beyond, dig deeper to figure out how. I haven't found anything about. I found a footprint for Margaret Collins, but I can't connect her to those other Collinses. So that's where, if she's indeed connected to them, according to what those other folks have listed on their trees, her folks come from Louisiana, which may be a possibility since she actually moved back there. But she might have moved back there because her daughter moved back there. But at this point, there is a lot for me to find out there. And so, my hope was that someone would say, "Hey, that's my ancestor too." That one of you would do that. That would be so great. But alas, we will figure it out because of these gatherings and keep doing this, and because there's no end to what we can do, especially given how we can use the DNA now. It's through the DNA that I know I'm connected to Tracy, right? But and we're distant cousins, but we haven't been able to back it up with the documentation and pinpoint that connection. So anyway, that's all I wanted to share with you today. And of course, along with Chris, willing to answer any questions and accept any new information that will lead me on my way.